And now James is going to return to talk about Murnong project that happened a couple of years ago. Yeah, cheers, James, from the CEC.
Thanks, Jack. Hopefully you're not too sick of seeing my face or hearing my voice yet. But yeah, once again, before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadawanud, Gulajan, Kirewarong, Dargwarong and Pikarong people on whose land this project is being carried out on. A lot of you may already be familiar with Murnong, but for those who aren't, it is also referred to as a yam daisy, and prior to the British invasion, it was grown by Aboriginal people across southeastern Australia as a staple food crop. It's a perennial plant that usually flowers between August and December, and depending on the species and climatic conditions, of course. It also has a distinctive nodding flower head that produces vibrant yellow flowers. The flowers look remarkably similar to those of the very common invasive Hypercharis reticata or Katsia, which is really unfortunate if you're doing surveys in a field of Hypercharis looking for a solitary Murnong. The edible below-ground tubers of Murnong are delicious, nutrient-dense package that have 3 different classifications. There's the grandparent tuber, the parent tuber, and the grandchildren tubers. When harvesting the plant, you're only supposed to take the parent tuber, leaving the grandparent and grandchildren tubers in the ground to produce the following season's harvest. So think of it as a cycle. There are stories of millions of Murnong blanketing plains in yellow for as far as the eye can see, with mob regularly harvesting and eating the crop by baking it in an earth oven or roasting it over a fire. By 1860, however, it was as good as gone from the landscape due to the ongoing catastrophic effects of colonisation, such as land dispossession and Western agricultural practices, just to name a few. This once abundant plant of incredible social, cultural, and economic importance is now only found in extremely small stands of remnant vegetation. This project, all in all, investigated the contemporary and pre-invasion distribution, community ecology, and soil ecology of Murnong across Eastern Maar territories, with the aim of gaining a greater understanding of where Murnong grew under traditional Aboriginal management and what environmental conditions are essential for it to thrive. We used a combination of literature reviews, flora surveys, sediment cores, and soil samples to gain a comprehensive insight into the status and history of Murnong on this land. Widespread flora surveys of Murnong populations inform the contemporary distribution and flora community structure. Paleo-ecological analysis of sediment cores from a series of targeted water bodies looked at pollen and charcoal counts, giving further insight into Murnong's historical distribution, abundance, and also the other prevalent flora making up those communities at the time, and the corresponding fire regimes. Soil samples were also taken from the flora survey sites to better understand the ideal soil ecology and any underlying relationships essential for Murnong growth. I'll mostly be speaking to the flora survey results today, but if you want to know more about the cause and are feeling brave, you can harass Michael later on. Oh, missed one. The red pins on this map show the official recordings of Murnong since 1850. Ignore the blue pins, they're just preliminary sediment core sites. You can see its distribution lines up nicely with the Victorian volcanic plain, if you're familiar with that, and the corresponding open grassy country that's north of the Otway Ranges. Of all of those sites, only 14 within the last 20 years have been officially observed to contain Murnong. These sites were all visited to conduct flora surveys and get a gauge on the population, but once again, of those 14 sites, only 6 were found to have Murnong. When getting out to the sites, Actually finding Murnong took a considerable amount of time, not only because of the high amount of cat's ear and hairy hawkbit getting around, but also a lot of the sites were underwater. As you can see, I was really thankful I brought my gumboots that day. The method we used consisted of 5 2x2 metre quadrats, where all flora species were identified and then given a percentage cover. The central quadrat was centred over a Murnong, with 4 other quadrats placed 5 metres away in each cardinal direction. Other information was also collected, such as the coordinates, covariates, and other observed threatening processes happening within that area. Threatening processes include weed invasion, grazing, trampling, invasive wildlife such as rabbits, hares, slugs I've heard recently, rubbish dumping, lack of fire, herbicide use, and even vehicle disturbance. At some of these sites, people were just doing burnouts on the flora reserves. It was shocking. From this data, I ran some NMDS ordination plots to look at the flora compositions and community. Each circle in the plot represents a different survey site. By how much they overlap with each other indicates the amount of similarity between the sites. As you can see, all the sites are quite different from each other, except for CR, which just decided to overlap with them all. It shows that even though flora communities are different, Murnong can still persist. These graphs look at the percentage cover of native versus introduced species occurring across all of the sites. There seems to be pretty good native species cover. However, as most of us would know, it doesn't take long for invasive species like Phalaris to dominate and completely alter a system, so this is definitely a watch. And there are a bunch of future research and management actions that need to take place so we can boost our understanding of the population and ultimately increase resilience. We need to look at what role management actions are having on Murnong populations, conduct long-term annual flora surveys to monitor population health, trial various management techniques combined with monitoring, start re-vegging and planting Murnong, as well as directly address the issue of these multiple threatening processes. Before I finish, I'd like to acknowledge the other amazing people who worked on this project: Jack Pascoe, Michael Sean Fletcher, Kate Howe, and the various other individuals who have contributed in some other way. You know who you are. I would also like to express my gratitude for being part of this Indigenous-led project, which is poised to contribute to incredibly meaningful outcomes. So, thank you.
Thanks, bro. Any questions for James? Yeah.
Thanks. James, was it Walteri or Scapagira? In most of those plots, sorry.
Yeah, it was mostly Scapagira. Most of the survey sites were located in wetlands, so wetter areas, whereas Walteri is more in the woodlands associated there.
Do they grow together in similar forests or natural areas?
From the sites that I surveyed, I didn't see them growing together, but yeah, potentially.
I reckon you're good, bro. Oh, it is quite hard to see, thanks. Sorry.
Yeah.
Good for Tim. Do his steps for the day.
Yeah.
Okay, he's done his steps for the day now, that's all right. Job done. James, we had a chat yesterday. You're happy to group Scapagira with as Murnong, because it's quite a different structure underground, and I don't know. I've always wondered whether it was a food source or not, and do we know what the evidence is for that? And just to answer the other question that came from over here, yes, there is a site out towards Wandoo where a matter of elevation has Walteri and Scapagira within about 20 or 30 metres of each other, but that's elevation though. The Scapagira is still in a swampy area, and the Walteri is up on a rise. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, so the root structures are inherently different. Scapagera with the longer, spindly, carrot-like roots, and Walteri with the more bulbous, radish-like roots. I'm happy to group it as Murnong, but as you also know, John, the genetic argument around Microseris species at the moment and separating them is ongoing. But yeah, at this stage, like I'm certainly not in a position to answer any question on whether it was harvested or not or how it was used.
Yes, I wasn't disputing the taxonomy. It was more about whether there is a record of the Scapagera form being a known food source, but that's something you've said that you're not sure yourself, so that's fine. I just would love to know the answer to that one.
I've eaten them both. I don't know whether that counts, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, most of the cultivated stuff is Scapagera. I mean, when people started growing it, it was much easier to grow, so they grew that and called it Murnong, and I just don't know whether that is legitimate or not, and whether it was seen as a food source. But yeah, it is edible, so very likely it was. But thank you.
Cheers, mate. You can stay.